We're covering a lot of channels now and a lot of good information going out there. So hit us on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter. You can find us in a lot of places. So don't be shy. Follow us, talk to us, send us comments, tell us what you want to hear, and we'll actually build a show around subject matter that you'd like to know more about. So
absolutely, you'll have everyone have to check out our Instagram after the show, because we had some twinning situation going on in the office between a couple of the guys. Real precious.
Oh, really?
Well, they didn't think that they were twinning, but they have the same color palette. I was like, oh my goodness, we have to get a picture of this. You guys are on the same page.
Oh, that's great. In the same office or?
Same office.
Yeah?
They are present and accounted for.
Okay. Well, let's dig in. Let's talk about some behavioral finance.
All right. So I know we talked about a few last week, but then during the show, obviously you can't cover all of them at once, but Phil mentioned that there were some that he has written about a lot in the past that we need to cover still.
Yeah. When you think about it, there's probably more than what we've studied. I mean, if you really get into the finer points of emotions and finance, and you start putting those things together, most people react. I think life in general is built off of emotion. So no matter what we do, it always has an emotion associated with it. So finance is no different. And, I thought it would be important for us to talk about a few more of these biases before we, or a few more of these behavioral finance items before we move to another subject, which we might get through all of it today. So let's give it a shot. What are we going to start with?
Absolutely. We're going to start with anchoring bias. And we've talked about a few behavioral finance issues last week and then very early on in the show, but I don't believe that we have covered this one. And anchoring bias is basically whatever you see first, you develop an anchor to that information. And it's very hard to reel that anchor back in and be unbiased and see things from a different perspective, because it's your first, it's almost like your first love. You don't forget it. So you're anchored to that piece of information until you, talk to your therapist and work yourself out of that.
It's unfortunate, I guess, in a lot of ways, but you're right. Some people have to get therapy to be able to remove or to get away from this anchoring bias. But, for listeners who are not quite clear on what we're saying or how this anchoring bias might play a role in their life, I'll give you a perfect example. And I'll say this because sitting here staring at Sarah, it just came to mind. Women, for the most part, have this urge to buy shoes.
We love shoes.
I don't know why, but women just love shoes.
Absolutely. They make the outfit.
Yeah, I guess. But so for whatever reason, women require no fewer than 100 pairs of shoes at any point in their life. So, this is some kind of prerequisite. So if you're a guy listening and you're not married and you're thinking about it, just recognize that
shoes are always a good gift. That's what you need to recognize.
100%. Recognize that, but also recognize that when you build your house, don't think that building a closet without good shoe shelves, look, if you skip that step, you're in trouble. Make sure you accommodate your wife. Otherwise, it's going to be painful. You'll have boxes stacked everywhere. Anyway, so here's sort of how you figure out this anchoring bias thing and maybe apply it to or you can see how it's been applied in your life. So you walk into the store and you see this pair of shoes, and the retail is $350 for the pair of what are those Choo shoes or something that are so expensive? Jimmy Choo.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably more like $800. Yeah. The Choo shoe. So you walk in and you see it, but then all of a sudden that tag is X'd.
Oh,
right.
Discount.
And just below it is a tag that says 50% off.
Oh man.
Right.
Jimmy Choos are not going to be 50% off.
Right.
But go ahead.
Right. Unless the dog chewed them. But in all seriousness, that's where anchoring bias comes in, because all of a sudden you anchor
that first initial.
You see that one and immediately you say, oh my gosh, I can save that much money. And so you're anchored to that discount, and it'll drive your decision, because no matter, even if you don't need the pair of shoes, you'll say, wow, how can I get those at 50 off? Got to do it. That's where anchoring bias can come in. Same way with a stock. If someone buys a stock and that thing falls in value, they rarely get too concerned about that in terms of maybe it being a good time to get rid of it because fundamentally it's no good anymore. They go back to what they paid for it, and perhaps their logic then becomes, well, I just need to let it recover, let it come back up to at least what I paid for it, because they're anchored to that initial price. Anchoring bias is dangerous, and so we think in the world of finance that that's where good coaching, good financial planning, having a good advisor that can help you work through those things and avoid the emotional anchor that can keep you in something too long when it really doesn't fit anymore, or maybe it just doesn't perform anymore.
Exactly. And I think you said it a second ago, sticking to the fundamentals and the facts rather than your bias and your emotion. Because if you're holding on to a stock because you bought it at 300 and now it's trading at 15, you're not sticking to the facts. You are emotionally making decisions, and that is a poor decision.
Yeah, and you probably wrote it down. You watched it all that time. It didn't just go from 300 to 15. You watched it, and you stuck with it thinking, oh, no, it'll stop here in a minute. And someone told me that it's almost over, and I read that it's still a good company, but
it's going to make a comeback.
Yeah, it's going to make a comeback. I hear that one all the time. But the fact is, when you get anchored to something, it can cause you to make irrational decisions. So that's one to be aware of. And I don't think many people appreciate that anchoring bias is real. In fact, it's just part of life. You see that sale tag, or you see something that's associated with that item, and you stick to that, and you forget all the other things that really matter in that decision.
Oh, yeah. And you just said sell. It's all about the marketing too. I mean, these companies know what they're doing, finance aside. I mean, they're not trying to discount their stock. That would be terrible. But when you're shopping, they know what they're doing when they're discounting things, because they understand anchoring bias.
Oh, 100%. They build marketing around it. And I mean, you think about it, I don't care how far back you go in time, and doesn't matter which generation we're talking about, everybody can remember when something was on sale and it felt like, I've got to buy it. This has to be a good deal. In fact, I'll take a couple of them. I'll take all you got because it's such a good deal. And look, I'm not saying that because it's everybody else. I'm saying that because I've experienced it, and I've bought out a shelf of stuff when I thought it was such a good deal, and it was anchoring bias. And then, a year later, half of it has expired, and you thought,
still sitting in your garage.
Yeah, was it really a good deal?
Yep.
It felt like it at the time, but that's anchoring bias. So I think Blake forgot to turn the air down for us. What do you think? It was pretty dang warm in here.
You were just talking about you want to fly to an island, so I think that was.
Is that what it is? I'm thinking.
You're in that island mindset. We're going to talk about wine in a minute. You're thinking about white wine on a beach.
Maybe I'm just living vicariously through that scene that I'm picturing here.
Yeah, there you go.
Being on the beach. I don't know.
There it goes. All right.
Oh man.
So our second behavioral finance topic for today is going to be confirmation bias. I think that, so this one is one of those that I think you can not easily, but there is a definite counter to get out of this confirmation bias. But let's talk about what it is first, and then we'll talk about how to counter it.
I love it.
Confirmation bias. So it's ultimately someone has this idea in their mind, and their decision is made before they hear any other input. So they don't get any other type of facts. It's just that one thing that they hear that they know is correct.
They've made up their mind before they have a chance to consider. In fact, I think when it comes to confirmation bias, they don't really want to hear anything else because it might dissuade them from doing what it is that they set out to do. And so people just get so focused on what it is that they want as the outcome, they'll filter out everything else. And boy, that really affects decision making.
Oh, it does. One for the finance books. We recently had someone who we presented some facts to about a fee. And, they wanted so hard to be correct. And, they had their mind made up that even numbers, very specific numbers, could not persuade them otherwise. And that's natural. It's just their confirmation bias.
Well, the fact of the matter is that person had made up their mind. I remember the case, and that person made up their mind, and they didn't want to hear anything that would change their mind. And it was because there was so much emotion involved.
Mm-hmm.
There was family, there was all this stuff involved, and they didn't want to have to, number one, they didn't want to admit that anything was wrong. They certainly did not want to begin considering that the person they thought they could trust might have been giving them some inaccurate information.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically ruled out everything else because they had made up their mind. This is where I'm headed. I'm going there no matter what, in spite of the landmines that I may step on as I'm getting there.
Right.
And you're right. I mean, they basically ignored everything else, even the black and white, when it was right in front of them, fact, and it's hard to argue the fact, but you can certainly have this confirmation bias that says, hey, I'm not going to listen to anything else, so I'll just filter it out. So you know it's real, but you just filter it out so you don't have to make the decision that goes against what you really want.
Right. And a lot of these situations, people are hearing, facts and figures and things that contradict what they have taught themselves to believe, but they filter it. They refuse. It's almost as though they have built that wall up, and by God, they're going to die behind that wall. They're not going to listen to anyone. And when we started the show, Phil was talking about how this is all about comprehensive planning and wealth management. We don't even have to try to make all of this tie back into comprehensive wealth management. It just does. And this does very clearly, because use an expert or pull in, I said we were going to talk about how to counter this bias. Read people who contradict your confirmation.
Absolutely.
Listen to people. You can have conflicting views all the time, but when you listen to them, really listen, don't listen to respond. And it may give you some little tidbit of information that will sway this confirmation bias.
Yeah, we talked about that last week a little bit, and we said always give it 24 hours. Whatever it is you're about to do, give it the 24-hour rule. And I think 24-hour rule comes back to or comes into play here because if you at least avoid the impulse, you give it 24 hours, you at least have a chance to read some of those conflicting opinions, if you will, that you're talking about, Sarah, and maybe, not always, but maybe you'll get a nugget of information that says, okay, I've got to pay attention to this. This is the reality. This is fact. And I'm ignoring it because I really want this outcome, but does it really make sense?
Right.
And, the impulse buy is really closely connected to that confirmation bias, because in an impulse buy, you just zone out. Everything goes away. You don't want to be influenced by anything except the idea that you're about to get something that you think you want or need. So I agree with you. I think you have to, you got to get some conflicting information, something that might make you see there's a different way to look at that purchase.
Oh yeah. Everyone has different perspectives. So even if you think you don't have confirmation bias, if you go out there and you read people who have differing views from you, you're going to quickly see, they have all these life experiences and wisdom. Everyone has different, situations. It's just always worth it to go read something that is totally conflicting from how you feel and what you see.
Yeah, could not agree more. That's such a good point. So confirmation bias, definitely important. Not the only one, but it's another big one that I think allows people, or it gets people into a habit even of just making bad decisions, because they, once you do it a few times, you begin to believe that whatever you want or whatever it is you're about to do, you just make it right. And, that's probably not a good way to grow, not a good way to get better with your knowledge. And you're probably going to make a lot of bad decisions, bad purchases, particularly, and that never ends well.
No, and this is another example too of using industry experts rather than assuming that you know everything.
Gosh, boy, what a great point, Sarah. And we implore people all the time, use us as a resource, come talk to us. And if you're a client, absolutely talk to us. You have that right. You've paid for that. We give you anything and everything that you need in terms of time and knowledge. But interestingly enough, these people who choose to go it alone and do it on their own, here's what's really interesting. Today we live in this great age where you can Google everything. However, you can Google a subject, and I promise you, almost every time you can find an opinion that matches what you want it to be.
Oh, yes.
Which means there's no one way, and everybody doesn't agree on it. You're going to find people that can spin something to make it sound like what you're looking for, but you can also find people that spin it so it doesn't match that. And you have to be able to discern which is reasonable, which is the truth. But there's so much conflicting stuff out there. You don't just become an expert by Googling. You've got to be able to discern the knowledge. So where experience comes into play, which you just mentioned, experts that focus their life on this kind of work, that's all we do. So when it comes to finance, we're not bothered by other things that we're trying to accomplish or learn. Our career is this, and we want to be expert at this, and that's what we deliver. So why go out and try to figure out what makes the most sense when you've got experts on your team already? And I think people forget that a lot. A lot of do-it-yourselfers out there, and as you well know, I think everyone on our team knows, we have undone more problems and fixed more problems for clients than you can count. And it happens every year. If someone will come in and they've made these decisions and realized too late that they probably weren't the best decisions because they had bad advice or read the wrong stuff, or they didn't comprehend it properly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that too. And one of the examples, and this is going to go with the confirmation bias and our next one, is I know there's a show on Netflix, and so everybody's talking about it. My husband and I were recently talking with friends about it, how you surround yourself with like-minded people. Most people do. Most people surround themselves with like-minded people. Most people on social media follow those that feel and believe the same way that they do. So that just enforces a lot of people's confirmation bias because they've filtered out everything that isn't what they believe.
Yeah.
So they're not seeing anything that's going to conflict what they're saying. It's just reinforcing and reinforcing and reinforcing. And when you're on social media, it's doubly reinforcing.
It totally reinforces it. You're exactly right. And, I think if you want to think of it as stacking the deck, that's exactly what it is. And so if you're building this group of followers, or you're part of these groups on social media, and everyone is of basically like mind or very similar minded, you may not get challenged on anything. People might just simply applaud what you have to say, and you might return the favor. Well, that's good to a point. But if you don't get something that conflicts with that, all of a sudden you begin to become very myopic. You don't compare anything, and you have nothing to compare to. So you end up on this narrow path that is sort of a one-way street. And I think it's good to have things that, whether they're right or wrong, I think it's good to see comparisons and counter opinions. If you don't, I just don't believe you really grow. You get stuck in things like a confirmation bias because you're stacking the deck. You've got people that are going to tell you what you want to hear. And unfortunately, when you hear what you want to hear, you're probably going to make a decision based on that.
Oh, yeah.
We talk about that all the time around here, and that is we have to say things that are tough. We don't always want to say them to a client. We'd love to tell them what they want to hear, but that's not always the reality. And we don't live in an age where you just get that luxury. It sounds cool until you all of a sudden realize, wait a minute, it's not working. Why in the world didn't you just tell me the truth? Well,
where were the facts?
Yeah, where were the facts? And so I think that's where that opposition comes into play. You need someone who's willing to do that. And really it starts with self. You have to be willing to listen to some things that oppose the way you believe, just to be sure that you're not missing something. I mean, it to me is it's so important. If you miss that, if you don't do that, I think you cheat yourself and probably push yourself more and more into that confirmation bias zone.
Oh, yeah. So this is, again, one of those biases that you can absolutely crawl your way out of that hole. You just have to be willing to, again, listen to listen, not listen to respond to conflicting information from how you were brought up or how you feel or what you believe. Just listening will really help counter it.
I'll give you a perfect example. We're in the middle of election season,
Mm-hmm.
and I hear Democrats and Republicans, both sides, say, oh, I just can't stand to listen to them. I can't do it. Well, guess what? At the very core, you go into that battle and you're trying to win a position or a seat. Believe me, the Democrat or the Republican, they're listening to each other. Otherwise, they can't strategize and understand how to defeat their opponent.
Right. Yeah.
So they may not want to listen to that person either, but I promise you, strategically, they're listening because they know it's the only way that they can develop a plan of action to help them win or do whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. I don't necessarily love everyone's ideas. I don't always want to hear them, and they don't always want to hear mine, but I'm willing to listen because I can at least juxtapose two things. And if you're reasonably smart, you can probably figure out which one actually makes a little more sense.
Absolutely. All right. So confirmation bias, huge, present in everyone's life. Just be aware.
No doubt.
And it really goes hand in hand. We were just talking about the election and COVID last week and all of that. It goes into our next bias, which is herding bias.
Well, that is politics wrapped up in one emotion. It's all the herd. Don't you think?
Yeah, I am voting Democrat. I am voting Republican. And by God, I don't care what their policies are or how they've drastically changed over the past 50 years. I'm voting Republican or I'm voting Democrat.
Yeah, that's a herding bias for sure.
Oh, yeah.
People, they get into it. They get locked into certain groups and they do things, whether it really matches them as a person, whether it matches them in terms of their morals or whether it matches them in terms of their character. I mean, they just do it because, well, that's what everybody's doing. I know all those people. Mm-hmm. I'll just follow them. And, I have to tell you that the herd is bad in so many ways. It's easy to get lost in the noise. Mm-hmm. And it's also easy to follow other people because if you don't feel like you have the answer, you don't have the confidence to go find the answer and then live with that answer, whatever it is that you decide to do with that situation, then you're more likely to simply follow because you don't want to make a bad decision. So you just follow the herd. Doesn't always yield good results. And Warren Buffett, probably the world's greatest investor, he said decades and decades ago, don't follow the crowd. Mm-hmm. It's the one principle that he's followed forever. Go in the opposite direction and you'll probably do very well because herds, if you see a lot of fear, go the other way because probably you're getting ready to buy good deals in the stock market, and vice versa.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, this herding thing, let's talk more about it because it's, and it starts early, huh?
It does. And it's animalistic. I mean,
wait a minute. Did you just say animalistic?
Yes, I did.
It's animalistic. Dogs and animals run in herds, right?
They do. And that is just purely survival. They run in herds because so this prey has a larger presence for the predator. We don't have to do that. We can be more intelligent. We are not trying. There's no predator out there trying to get us. I mean, that's a whole different story. But there's no large predator. That's not our survival skills is being in a herd.
Right. No, we're taught to survive individually.
Yeah.
Now, we can do lots of great things together. So there's a time when the herd really matters. But to me, that's really more when you start talking about building a core or a team of people to accomplish something, not to simply follow in one direction so as to miss other things, other opportunities. And I think a lot of people miss tremendous opportunities when they get stuck in the herd. Mm-hmm. I had it said to me once by a person in our industry. He had been in our profession forever. And he always said, look, the one thing you never want to do is look like all of your peers. Don't look like your competition because what's going to make you different? And when things are not going perfect, and he said they won't always go perfect, you need to make sure that you stand out. You shouldn't look like everybody else. Well, that stuck with me years and years ago. And today there's a lot of similarities in our business. I mean, really, we're kind of a commodity anymore, but the way you serve clients, the way you do things, the technology that you bring to the table, all of those things, and then how you put it together in terms of value add to the client, you can absolutely separate yourself. I think when you get in the herd, you get missed.
Absolutely. What you said a second ago, go read a lot of financial planner websites. You're going to find the same wording everywhere.
Looks like everybody has the same site, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it is definitely just how you deliver and what you do, because we all are on the surface very similar. I mean, we serve the same role, but what you actually do in your actions, that's where it sets you apart.
I think the herding thing, we say it like this, it starts when we're kids. We learn it early, and we want to do what the rest of our classmates are doing. If everybody's going on the field trip, we want to go. If everyone's doing this, we want to do it with them. Otherwise, we get what we talked about several months ago, FOMO.
Oh, yes.
Fear of missing out, right?
Yep.
I mean, what a great acronym. I'm not a big acronym guy, but I love that one. And it's so true, and it speaks directly to herding bias. So people they see others doing it, man, they want to get in because they don't want to miss. So there's a party, oh my gosh, I hope I get invited. I don't want to miss anything. And so that's just part of that herding bias, and it affects people in a lot of ways, particularly with these irrational decisions that are made. It's rooted within us from an early age. We're never going to get out of it, but here we are, and I think you made a mention here of COVID-19. We're dealing with COVID-19, and so all of a sudden, and then social unrest.
Yes. Yep.
Both of those things are creating herds. COVID-19, you've got basically a few factions. One believes it's doing this, and one believes it's doing that, and here's how you offset it, or here's how you avoid it. And then you've got the social unrest. So you have a faction that believes that all of these things about race and so many things, that's a faction. And then you've got other factions who say, well, wait a minute, we just need to have a conversation about that, and let's figure out how do you solve it. But that's created two herds. And so now the two herds, when I listen to them, I think ultimately they all want to get to the same place, but they're so hung up in their way of doing it, they forget that there's other ways. And then you just get people jumping on the bandwagon. If it sounds kind of similar to what they want to do, then they just jump on and they follow the herd.
And it feels good. I mean,
it feels right.
Psychologically, it feels right. It feels like you're making, you're following the right decision. But herding is another one that goes back to, have you listened to the other side of things?
That's right.
Have you taken a step back? You don't really have to go, maybe you don't have to go the direct opposite of the crowd. Maybe you just need to branch off and provide a different perspective for others in your little herd.
Well, the best example that I can give, or at least the best, anecdotally thing that I could say, I believe, is if you could just feel yourself or picture yourself in a crowd, it is really noisy in a crowd, even when people are trying to be quiet. When they're just whispering, when there's a herd, even a whisper creates a lot of noise, and it's really hard to focus when there's lots of noise around you, and it's hard to make good decisions. On the other hand, if you can pull away from the herd, you can think.
Yeah.
And you can compare, and you can look at what they're saying and hear what they're saying and think about that, and then juxtapose that with, say, another group and another herd, and listen to that, and then you can make reasonable decisions because your mind is clear. But I think when you get in the middle of a herd, boy, it gets noisy, and it's hard to cut out that noise.
Oh, yeah. I have never thought about that. Awesome thing. Awesome wisdom from our president.
49 years of experience, Sarah.
Oh, good grief. So it was Dwayne's birthday yesterday. We didn't say anything about it because it wasn't today, but happy birthday to Dwayne, who is just a light at OmniStar.
He is. He's been with us a long time. Great guy.
We love him a whole lot. But somebody else has a big birthday this weekend.
Yes, my great nephew, Ellis.
He's full of it. He's talking about himself. Phil has his big 50th this weekend.
Yep.
We'll get back into that when we talk about wine, though.
But it is my great nephew's birthday. It's the same day as mine.
Aww.
And you know, it's terrible is I forgot his birthday last year. I actually called my niece and I said, "Hey, when is Ellis's birthday?" And she said, "Is that a joke, Uncle Phil?" And, you know, I thought to myself, oh, yes. It's on my birthday, and I totally forgot that. So my apologies. I won't let that happen again.
That's okay. We'll cut that part of the show so that in case Ellis is on here. Oh. Goodness gracious. Well, it's also my dad's birthday today, who I need to call. I sent him a text,
yeah.
But yeah, it's a great week for birthdays. Some of my favorite people in the world.
All right. Daddy Vaughn has a birthday. That's awesome. Down in Georgia.
I know. It's thanks to COVID, I probably will not be driving down there this weekend, but I do wish I could. So it's hard spending birthdays apart.
I know. Yeah, that's a fun time. And I hate that people can't be a little bit more social as it relates to those things, because they're always, particularly milestone birthdays. I mean, they're just fun times to celebrate.
They really are.
But hey, it is what it is. So what are we going to round out the conversation with on biases?
Biases, ambiguity.
Ooh, ambiguity aversion. I love this one, by the way.
So one time Phil brought this up to me. I don't think it was on a show. I think we were talking about something, and I answered incorrectly. So I'm going to let him talk about this one. I said something that went against what his point was, and he's like, all right, never mind, Sarah. So anyway,
just forget it. Just forget it.
Yeah. So I'll let him take this one.
You didn't answer it wrong. There really is no right or wrong answer here. It's really how you feel about things, and it tells the listener how you make decisions. Mm-hmm. But ambiguity aversion is just that. You know, if you think of the word ambiguity, it's two things, or it's being able to perceive more than one thing in the same way. And so if you think about something that's ambiguous, then all of a sudden you aren't really sure. It can be viewed in the same way, or it could be different, and it's confusing in a lot of ways. So it causes a real problem when it comes to emotional decisions, and particularly finance. So here's my attempt at giving you an example so you better understand it. So if you had these two choices, the question becomes, which one would you take, and then why does that matter? Mm-hmm. So option one, we have a bag, we'll call that bag number one, which contains 50 red balls and 50 black balls. Mm-hmm. Okay, so 50-50. Option two is bag number two that contains 100 balls. The ratio of red to black balls is unknown.
The fear of the unknown.
You'd call that more ambiguity than, say, bag number one. So it's hard to know, though you know both of them are filled with balls of the same color, black and red, but the ambiguity comes into play in a very strong way in option two. So the result in the test, when this was put in front of a lot of people, more people chose bag one because of the certainty. Mm-hmm. Now, for our listeners, Sarah chose bag two.
I thought that was like my immediate answer. Oh, bag two for sure.
You know what's crazy, though? What that tells you is that Sarah's willing to take more risk. That's really what that says, is she's more of she's less risk averse, and she's willing to take a little more risk. And as a younger person, that actually fits. That's the way you should think about investing. But most people, regardless of their age and time to retirement, mm-hmm. they tend to invest so conservatively. So they choose bag number one because there's certainty.
Yes.
The same folks that did this test, they also they do it every year, and they found that if a bet was placed, that people will shy away from a bet until the opportunity to win 7 times the amount they would lose is presented. So if they're going to lose $100, mm-hmm. they don't really want to take that bet if all they're going to win is 100. But if they could win 700, they take the bet. That's where they noticed the change was occurring. So people were likely to take a bet if the winnings were big enough.
Right.
But if they're even, most people shy away from the bet. So they don't like ambiguity. They don't like it's a fear of the unknown.
Yeah. Fear of the unknown. And that is, obviously that's something that's just consistent across humans. The fear of the unknown is gigantic. And in the market, it is so dominant amongst people. We do risk tolerance questionnaires with people as they are onboarded, and through their whole life cycle with OmniStar, and you can see, I mean, it reflects every aspect of their life usually.
Yeah,
it's not
so
just
true.
the market. When they do that risk tolerance, you know what type you can type that person basically.
You can totally type them. There's no doubt. Here's what's really interesting. This is where it gets really complicated. So now you start taking herding bias and you lump that with, say, ambiguity aversion. And now you get a real complicated thing, because here you've got people that are listening to the crowd that they so want to follow. And that creates this, it creates a bias for them. So now they're going to listen to those people. And if that group of people says, oh boy, you definitely want to choose bag number one, that's what they're going to do. They're going to follow the herd. And so now they don't even get to make their own decision based on their set of goals, their set of circumstances, their place in life, what they're trying to accomplish. None of that gets taken into consideration. They simply look in the mirror and they say, well, gosh, that's what the group's doing. I better do the same thing because they probably know more than I do. Right. And so that's where being able to separate the emotion, working with the right people, with the right professionals, those things can really make a tremendous difference in outcomes. But if you get focused too much in these biases, you get into the herd, you get into the ambiguity aversion, you shortchange yourself. We see it all the time.
Absolutely. And like I said, we don't even have to try to tie this back to planning and comprehensive wealth management. Every aspect of life points you in that direction.
True. It's so true. So, behavioral finance was never talked about until, say, the last 3 or 4 decades.
And now it's a huge field of study.
Big time.
Yeah.
It is a big field of study. I mean, there's experts out there across the country in it. There's designations now that you can get. But I can tell you this, whether you have designations or not, the fact of the matter is it's real. People are manipulated all the time. They make bad decisions because they don't recognize that the manipulation is occurring, whether they're doing it to themselves or they're following the herd or whatever it is. You have to be willing to stop and listen, get out of the crowd, listen to objective advice, listen to differing opinions, and be able to collectively put that together, or rather be able to put that together in a comparative way. And if you can't do that, this is the part that's so hard. Know what you don't know, which means you might need the help of an expert. And that's really where firms like ours come in to help people make these decisions that sometimes they just ignore them because they don't want to make a bad one. So rather than not make a decision or fear making a bad one, join a firm where you know, like, and trust the people, so you can get good advice to help you reach your goals and objectives and have a more successful and a more plentiful life.
Amen.
Yeah.